Under the Jaguar Sun by Italo Calvino. At Tepoztlan, we visited the church the Jesuits had built in the 18th century for their seminary, and no sooner was it consecrated than they had to abandon it, as they were expelled from Mexico forever. A theater church, all gold and bright colors, in a dancing and acrobatic baroque, crammed with swirling angels, garlands, panoplies of flowers, shells. Surely the Jesuits meant to compete with the splendor of the Aztecs, whose ruined temples and palaces, the royal palace of Quetzalcoatl, still stood to recall a rule imposed through the impressive effects of a grandiose, transfiguring art. There was a challenge in the air, in this dry and thin air, at an altitude of 2,000 meters, the ancient rivalry between the civilizations of America and Spain in the art of bewitching the senses with dazzling seductions. And from architecture, this rivalry extended to cuisine, where the two civilizations had merged, or perhaps where the conquered had triumphed, strong in the condiments born from their very soil. Through the white hands of novices and the brown hands of lay sisters, the cuisine of the new Indo-Hispanic civilization had become also the field of battle between the aggressive ferocity of the ancient gods of the Mesa and the sinuous excess of the Baroque religion. On the supper menu, we didn't find chiles en nogada. From one locality to the next, the gastronomic lexicon varied, always offering new terms to be recorded and new sensations to be defined. Instead, we found guacamole to be scooped up with crisp tortillas that snap into shards and dip like spoons into the thick cream. The fat softness of the aguacate, the Mexican national fruit, known to the rest of the world under the distorted name of avocado, is accompanied and underlined by the angular dryness of the tortilla, which, for its part, can have many flavors, pretending to have none. Then, guajolote con mole poblano, that is turkey with Puebla-style mole sauce, one of the noblest among the many moles, and most laborious. The preparation never takes less than 2 days, and most complicated because it requires several different varieties of chile, as well as garlic, onion, cinnamon, cloves, pepper, cumin, coriander, and sesame, almonds, raisins, and peanuts, with a touch of chocolate, and finally quesadillas, another kind of tortilla really, for which cheese is incorporated in the dough, garnished with ground meat and refried beans. Right in the midst of chewing, Olivia's lips paused, almost stopped, though without completely interrupting their continuity of movement, which slowed down as if reluctant to allow an inner echo to fade, while her gaze became fixed, intent on no specific object, in apparent alarm. Her face had a special concentration that I had observed during meals ever since we began our trip to Mexico. I followed the tension as it moved from her lips to her nostrils, flaring one moment, contracting the next. The plasticity of the nose is quite limited, especially for a delicate, harmonious nose like Olivia's. And each barely perceptible attempt to expand the capacity of the nostrils in the longitudinal direction actually makes them thinner, while the corresponding reflex movement, accentuating their breadth, then seems a kind of withdrawal of the whole nose into the surface of the face. What I have just said might suggest that in eating, Olivia became closed into herself, absorbed with the inner course of her sensations. In reality, on the contrary, the desire her whole person expressed was that of communicating to me what she was tasting, communicating with me through flavors, or communicating with flavors through a double set of taste buds, hers and mine. "Did you taste that? Are you tasting it?" She was asking me with a kind of anxiety, as if at that same moment our incisors had pierced an identically composed morsel, and the same drop of savor had been caught by the membranes of my tongue and of hers. "Is it cilantro? Can you taste the cilantro?" she insisted, referring to an herb whose local name hadn't allowed us to identify it with certainty. Was it coriander, perhaps? And of which a little thread in the morsel we were chewing sufficed to transmit to the nostrils a sweetly pungent emotion, like an impalpable intoxication. Olivia's need to involve me in her emotions pleased me greatly, because it showed that I was indispensable to her, and that for her the pleasures of existence could be appreciated only if we shared them. Our subjective, individual selves, I was thinking, find their amplification and completion only in the unity of the couple. I needed confirmation of this conviction all the more since, from the beginning of our Mexican journey, the physical bond between Olivia and me was going through a phase of rarefaction, if not eclipse, a momentary phenomenon, surely, and not in itself disturbing, part of the normal ups and downs to which, over a long period, the life of every couple is subject. And I couldn't help remarking how certain manifestations of Olivia's vital energy, certain prompt reactions or delays on her part, yearnings or throbs, continued to take place before my eyes, losing none of their intensity, with only one significant difference. Their stage was no longer the bed of our embraces, but a dinner table. During the first few days, I expected the gradual kindling of the palate to spread quickly to all our senses. I was mistaken. Aphrodisiac this cuisine surely is, but in itself and for itself. This is what I thought to understand, and what I am saying applies only to us at that moment. I cannot speak for others or for us if we had been in a different humor. It stimulated desires, in other words, that sought their satisfaction only within the very sphere of sensation that had aroused them. In eating new dishes, therefore, that would generate and extend those same desires. We were thus in the ideal situation for imagining what the love between the abbess and the chaplain might have been like. A love that, in the eyes of the world and in their own eyes, could have been perfectly chaste and at the same time infinitely carnal in that experience of flavors gained through secret and subtle complicity. Complicity. The word, the moment it came into my mind, referring not only to the nun and the priest, but also to Olivia and me, heartened me, because if what Olivia sought was complicity in the almost obsessive passion that had seized her, then this suggested we were not losing, as I had feared, a parity between us. In fact, it seemed to me during the last few days that Olivia, in her gustatory exploration, had wanted to keep me in a subordinate position, a presence necessary indeed, but subaltern, obliging me to observe the relationship between her and food as a confidant, or as a compliant pander. I dispelled this irksome notion that had somehow or other occurred to me. In reality, our complicity could not be more total, precisely because we experience the same passion in different ways, in accord with our temperaments. Olivia, more sensitive to perceptive nuances and endowed with a more analytical memory, where every recollection remained distinct and unmistakable. I, tending more to define experiences verbally and conceptually, to mark the ideal line of journey within ourselves contemporaneously with our geographical journey. In fact, this was a conclusion of mine that Olivia had instantly adopted. Or perhaps Olivia had been the one to prompt the idea, and I simply proposed it to her again in words of my own. The true journey, as the introjection of an outside different from our normal one, implies a complete change of nutrition, a digesting of the visited country, its fauna and flora, and its culture. Not only the different culinary practices and condiments, but the different implements used to grind the flour or stir the pot, making it pass between the lips and down the esophagus. This is the only kind of travel that has a meaning nowadays, when everything visible you can see on television without rising from your easy chair. And you mustn't rebut that the same result can be achieved by visiting the erotic restaurants of our big cities. They so counterfeit the reality of the cuisine they claim to follow that, as far as our deriving real knowledge is concerned, they are the equivalent not of an actual locality, but of a scene reconstructed and shot in a studio. All the same, in the course of our trip, Olivia and I saw everything there was to see, no small exploit in quantity or quality. For the following morning, we had planned a visit to the excavations of Monte Albán, and the guide came for us at the hotel promptly with a little bus. In the sunny, arid countryside grow the agaves used for mezcal and tequila, and nopales, which we call prickly pears, and cereus, all thorns, and jacaranda with its blue flowers. The road climbs up into the mountains. Monte Albán, among the heights surrounding a valley, is a complex of ruins, temples, reliefs, grand stairways, platforms for human sacrifice. Horror, sacredness, and mystery are consolidated by tourism, which dictates preordained forms of behavior, the modest surrogates of those rites. Contemplating these stairs, we try to imagine the hot blood spurting from the breast, split by the stone axe of the priest. 3 civilizations succeeded one another at Monte Albán, each shifting the same blocks. The Zapotecs building over the works of the Olmecs, and the Mixtecs doing the same to those of the Zapotecs. The calendars of the ancient Mexican civilizations, carved on the reliefs, represent a cyclic, tragic concept of time. Every 52 years, the universe ended. The gods died. The temples were destroyed. Every celestial and terrestrial thing changed its name. Perhaps the peoples that history defines as the successive occupants of these territories were merely a single people, whose continuity was never broken, even through a series of massacres like those the reliefs depict. Here on the conquered villages, their names written in hieroglyphics, and the god of the village, his head hung upside down. Here are the chained prisoners of war, the severed heads of the victims. The guide, to whom the travel agency entrusted us, a burly man named Alonso, with flattened features like an Olmec head or Mixtec, Zapotec, points out to us with exuberant mime the famous bas-reliefs called Los Danzantes. Only some of the carved figures, he says, are portraits of dancers with their legs in movement. Alonso performs a few steps. Others might be astronomers, raising one hand to shield their eyes and study the stars. Alonso strikes in astronomer's pose, but for the most part, he says, they represent women giving birth. Alonso acts this out. We learn that this temple was meant to ward off difficult childbirths. The reliefs were perhaps votive images. Even the dance, for that matter, served to make births easier through magic mimesis, especially when the baby came out feet first. Alonso performs the magic mimesis. One relief depicts a cesarean operation, complete with uterus and fallopian tubes. Alonso, more brutal than ever, mimes the entire female anatomy to demonstrate that a sole surgical torment linked births and deaths. Everything in our guide's gesticulation takes on a truculent significance, as if the temples of the sacrifices are cast their shadow on every thought and every act. When the most propitious date had been set, in accordance with the stars, the sacrifices were accompanied by the revelry of dances, And even births seem to have no purpose beyond supplying new soldiers for the wars to capture victims. Though some figures are shown running or wrestling or playing football, according to Alonso, these are not peaceful athletic competitions, but rather the games of prisoners forced to compete in order to determine which of them would be the first to ascend the altar. And the loser in the games was chosen for the sacrifice? I ask. No, the winner. Alonso's face becomes radiant. To have your chest split open by the obsidian knife was an honor. And in a crescendo of ancestral patriotism, just as he had boasted of the excellence of the scientific knowledge of the ancient peoples, so now this worthy descendant of the Olmecs feels called upon to exalt the offering of a throbbing human heart to the sun, to assure that the dawn would return each morning and illuminate the world. That was when Olivia asked, "But what did they do with the victims' bodies afterward?" Alonso stopped. "Those limbs, those entrails," Olivia insisted. "They were offered to the gods, I realize that, but practically speaking, what happened to them? Were they burned?" "No, they weren't burned." "Well, what then? Surely a gift to the gods couldn't be buried, left to rot in the ground." "Los sopilotes," Alonso said. "The vultures. They were the ones who cleared the altars and carried the offerings to heaven." "The vultures? Always?" Olivia asked further, with an insistence I could not explain to myself. Alonso was evasive, tried to change the subject. He was in a hurry to show us the passages that connected the priest's house with the temples, where they made their appearance, their faces covered by terrifying masks. Our guide's pedagogical enthusiasm had something irritating about it, perhaps because it gave the impression he was imparting to us a lesson that was simplified so that it would enter our poor profane heads, though he actually knew far more, things he kept to himself and took care not to tell us. Perhaps this was what Olivia had sensed, and what, after a certain point, made her maintain a closed, vexed silence through the rest of our visit to the excavations and on the jolting bus that brought us back to Oaxaca. Along the road, all curves, I tried to catch Olivia's eyes as she sat facing me, but thanks to the bouncing of the bus or the difference in the level of our seats, I realized my gaze was resting not on her eyes, but on her teeth. She kept her lips parted in a pensive expression, which I happened to be seeing for the first time not as the radiant glow of a smile, but as the instruments more suited to their purpose, to be dug into flesh, to sever it, tear it. And as you try to read a person's thoughts in the expression of his eyes, so now I looked at those strong, sharp teeth and sensed there a restrained desire, an expectation.